novel about womanhood, family, and friendship to add to your reading list is Black Girls Must Have It All by Jane Allen. Black Girls Must Have It All is the final installment in the beloved Black Girls Must Die Exhausted trilogy. And in this novel, we see our main character Tabitha trying to have it all and get the happy ending she's always wanted. In Black Girls Must Have It All, Tabitha Walker welcomed her new bundle of joy 3 weeks ago. But a newborn baby isn't the only thing she's juggling. She has a promotion she wants at work, she has a relationship ultimatum looming, an extended visit from her pushy mother-in-law, and she finds herself isolated from her friends and family when she needs them the most. Black Girls Must Have It All is a super relatable and honest novel about motherhood, friendship, self-confidence, and finding oneself. So add Black Girls Must Have It All by Jane Allen to your reading list and see if Tabitha can have it all and get the happy ending she's always wanted. Black Girls Must Have It All is now available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. So be sure to add this one to your reading list. Hello, I'm Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Rachel Beanland to talk about her latest novel, The House is on Fire. The House is on Fire is based on the true story of the December 1811 Richmond theatre fire. The novel follows 4 characters who survived the disastrous fire and how they and the community are forever changed. Rachel and I also talk about her debut novel, Florence, Adler Swims Forever, which I absolutely loved. And we also talk about Rachel's reading and writing life. She gives us great book and bookstore recommendations, reading tips, plus lots more. So let's get into the episode because I can't wait for you to listen to my chat with author Rachel Beanland. Oh, hi. If you like the show, can you please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast? Especially if you're listening on Apple, because it seems to really matter over there. Besides, you don't even have to write anything. Leaving 5 stars will do. If you don't like the show, however, well, that's your choice. But if you do like the show, it's a great way to help spread the word about the podcast and show your support. Believe me, I'm incredibly grateful. Alrighty, now on to the show. Hi readers, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me to talk about her sophomore novel, The House is on Fire, is Rachel Beanland. Hey Rachel, welcome to the Reader's Couch.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. The couch is very comfy.
Yay, I love it. Really excited to talk about your new book, The House is on Fire. I mean, how are you feeling? How excited are you?
I'm thrilled. I mean, anytime you have something that lives as a Word document on your computer for several years, the very idea that it becomes an object you can hold in your hand is like the most exciting thing ever. And then if people read it, that's even better.
Absolutely. Well, I want readers to hear it straight from you. Tell us about your novel, The House is on Fire, and what can readers expect when they pick up your book?
Yeah, so The House is on Fire is a novel based on the real story of the Richmond theater fire. I live in Richmond, Virginia. It's a very old city by American standards anyway. And in 1811, there was a really horrible theater fire. It claimed the lives of 72 people, affected both white and Black residents of the town, and just was the reverberations of the fire were felt all up and down the eastern seaboard. It was widely reported, even as far away as London. And really at that time, it was the largest single day calamity that the United States had ever experienced. We were a relatively young country. And so I'm following 4 characters in the aftermath of the fire. And I think as far as what readers can expect, they can expect a really fast paced narrative because there's so much happening.
Absolutely. I mean, you surely packed a lot into this book. But I really want to get into the characters that you're following, because this novel follows four characters. We have Sally, we have Celie, we have Jack, and we have Gilbert. So I want us to kind of just touch lightly on each character. So I want you to first tell us about Sally, who she is and what's going on.
Yeah. So it was very important to me when I was writing this book to choose characters, to create characters that were representative of the people who experienced this devastation. And so Sally Henry Campbell is the daughter of Patrick Henry. Um, Family kind of legend says that Patrick Henry's daughter really was at the fire. And so with Sally, I wanted to create a character who would have been up in the boxes, which were the more kind of elite seats in the house. They were more expensive, but they were also harder to get out of. And so people in the boxes, there was a large loss of life when it came to those people. They had to make a lot of really hard decisions. So Sally Henry Campbell is one of the characters who we meet that first night, as everyone's entering the theater, and we follow her, in the aftermath of the disaster. We also follow a man named Gilbert Hunt, who is another character who's based on a real person. Gilbert Hunt was an enslaved blacksmith who eventually bought his freedom in 1829, but it didn't happen when it probably should have happened. Which is, in 1811, he was really a hero. He saved about a dozen women's lives the night of the fire, and his heroics were kind of largely known but underreported, because of course the newspapers were written and published by white men, and they didn't share the stories of enslaved people. So his story is a really fascinating one. I follow Cecily Patterson, who is a young woman, a young enslaved woman who is up in the gallery when the fire breaks out. And so the theater had a gallery that was for free and enslaved Blacks. And um, afterwards, it was a little easier to escape the gallery, because the gallery did have its own entrance. Um, and so in the aftermath of the fire, there was a lot of questioning of, there were, of course, there were, Black individuals who died in the fire. But when white people were tallying those names and numbers, there was a lot of speculation about whether there had been people who had essentially faked their own deaths, who had said, "This is a really good opportunity for me to get out of here." And so Cecily, I explore that story with her. And then the last character is Jack Gibson, who is a young stagehand working behind the scenes of, with Placide and Green, the theater company. And the fire actually started backstage. And there was a lot of debate at the time about how the fire started. And they did a full inquest. And of course, the inquest was much more abbreviated than it maybe would be today. And it was clear when I read the kind of primary sources related to the fire that there was something being covered up. For certain, there were people who were being protected, and so with Jack, I'm able to really explore what's happening in the theater company, what happens with the start of the fire, and in many ways, Jack's story is a story of his own coming of age.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I was very fascinated and intrigued that it was based on the true story of a fire that happened in Richmond, because this was just all news to me. So it was really engrossing, incredibly suspenseful. I couldn't stop turning the pages, and I felt you really did a great job with the characters. I felt they were all just, really fully developed, and at the same time, I felt I was witness, sorry, to this catastrophe and watching it happening in real time as the community is responding, because the responses are varied, because they are trying to figure, okay, how did this fight happen? Was it this? Was it that? Was it something else? So we're also seeing or four main characters, in that moment, but just the community at large. So I really enjoyed this one.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's funny. Both my books, Florence Adler Swims Forever, my first novel, and then this one, they both are at some level grief narratives, right?
Mhm.
With Florence Adler Swims Forever, I was following a family in the aftermath of a daughter's death, and um, was very interested in the ways that all of these different family members are grieving her loss and making decisions and trying to move on, and all of these things that have to happen. And then it was interesting for me to kind of widen the lens with The House is on Fire, where, as you mentioned, I'm looking at a whole community's grief, to the extent that they even have time to grieve, right?
Mhm.
There's so much going on. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'm really curious though, Rachel, what inspired you to write this story, The House is on Fire? What made you feel like you were the person to tell this story and kind of bring it to light?
Yeah. Well, I moved to Richmond in 2007. And I really consider myself very lucky, because on the very first day I moved to Richmond, in fact, I hadn't even officially moved here. I had flown down to interview for a job, and some realtors were driving me around, kind of showing me the different neighborhoods in Richmond. And it was a husband wife team, and the husband, pointed. He was driving down Broad Street towards Church Hill, which is one of the city's oldest, most historic neighborhoods, and he points out the window at Monumental Church, and he says, "Yeah, this is Monumental Church. There used to be a theater there, and the church was built as a monument to the people who died inside the theater." And I just, it like stopped me in my tracks. And at the time I wasn't a novelist. I mean, I'd always loved to write, but I had no, no real aspirations, right? And I can remember thinking, like, oh my God, like that's the stuff of a novel, right? I was still a huge reader at that time. And so throughout the next kind of 15 years or so, whenever the story of the Richmond Theater Fire would come up, I would pay attention. I was very interested in the story. And what's interesting about the Richmond Theater Fire is that, at the time, as I mentioned, it was this gigantic event. It was like the 9/11 of their day, just absolutely gargantuan event that was reported, in Boston and DC and Philadelphia and everywhere. And so, but now, in kind of present day Richmond even, um very few people know about the fire. I mean, I wouldn't say, everyone in Richmond knows this story. And in fact, after I signed my book contract, and I'd be telling people, they'd ask what I'm working on, and I'd say, oh, I'm working on a story about the Richmond Theater Fire. I got a lot of blank stares, and I'd have to start from the beginning and say, well, there was a really bad theater fire. So partly, I felt like, just really lucky that I knew the story in the first place. And then there was just some kismet that had to happen, because I had been working on a different novel that was going to be set further afield, and would have probably been my second novel. But the pandemic hit, and suddenly I didn't know when I was going to be able to get on an airplane again, if ever. And the novel was going to require all this research, and I just thought, when am I going to leave my house, let alone my city? And I started to think about, a Richmond-based story. Like, what's something I could write that's set in my own backyard, that would require less travel, and that could be something I could dig into in this in between time. And the Richmond Theater Fire was the kind of natural choice for me, because it had been sitting there stewing for a decade and a half.
I'm curious though, what kind of research did you have to do? Because I think it's fascinating that on your real estate, I guess, kind of tour and,
Yeah.
the agent pointing out, oh, this is here and this happened, that you discovered something in history that I'm going to go on a limb and assume a lot of people don't know, to now having a novel about it. What kind of research did you do? And, just tell us about that process.
Yeah, I mean, the research was intense. I'm not gonna lie. Um, I went to a lot of the primary sources to the extent that I was able to during the pandemic. So, you had some archives that were closed during the pandemic, and others that remained open. And I'm super grateful to the ones that remained open. So, I would mask up and go into places like the Virginia Museum of History and Culture and the Library of Virginia, and these places that actually have pretty deep archives about the Richmond Theater fire. And so I was reading, firsthand accounts. I was reading these, the copies of the inquest reports, and a lot of these documents had actually, over the years, been bound together into these beautiful little publications that would be sold as commemorative items,
Mhm.
because just like today, when something traumatic happens, there is this public interest, right? And so printers were producing these documents that people could buy to have kind of everything about the fire in one place. I was also really grateful because there is a woman in town, Meredith Henny Baker, who's a public historian, and she had actually written a nonfiction book about the fire in 2012. And so I think, were it not for that, the book would have taken me 4 times as long to write. She was able to, she had done such a lovely job of kind of condensing the information and making sense of it, that made my life, a little bit easier. But I mean, one of the challenges with this book and with basing it on all of this incredible historical record was just trying to figure out which stories I was going to tell. Right, there were so many stories to emerge from the fire, and so I had to kind of, it was like fitting together a puzzle almost, to say, like, okay, I want this one and this one and this one and this one. Yeah.
Absolutely. I could also see where one character, because again, the narrative focuses on four, but one character could embody, let's say, 10 other people, for example,
Yeah.
like condensing the experiences. Because I kind of felt, again, we are getting a community story from this book, which is something I appreciated, but the focus on the four was still just, again, so well done because they were so fleshed out and there was just so much depth, I guess, to them. I can see maybe you possibly condensing more than one character into actually one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that kind of happened with Cecily, because there were two reported people. Historians believe that there were two people who may have faked their own deaths in the aftermath of the fire, and I chose to kind of create one character.
Hmm.
So that was an example of kind of whittling down the stories, to choose the right one for this tale.
Right, right. Okay. But in addition to The House is on Fire, I said this to you before, I'll definitely say it here now. Florence Adler Swims Forever was one of my favorite books. So, just in case there's someone here listening and they weren't familiar with Florence Adler, again, I know you mentioned it earlier, it is a story of grief too. But tell us about Florence Adler Swims Forever and what can readers expect if they decide to go back and pick that book up as well?
Yeah. So Florence Adler Swims Forever is also based on a true story, but it's based on a true story that actually occurred in my own family. Um, in 1929, I had a great great aunt named Florence Lowenthal, and she was training to swim the English Channel off the coast of Atlantic City, which was where she lived, when she drowned. And she was 19 years old. It was, an extremely tragic event, of course. And my grandmother was actually a little girl on the day she drowned, remembered her whole life, remembered Florence's body being brought back up onto the beach. And what made this story so fascinating to me, as I was growing up and hearing it, was that at the time that Florence drowned, my great grandmother was in the hospital on bed rest. She had lost a baby the previous summer and was pregnant again. And the family had deemed the pregnancy so risky that they decided not to tell her sister had died, and waited until she had delivered a baby before they told her. And when I was growing up and I would hear that story, all of the women in my family kind of universally said that they, believed that what my family had done, that it was the right thing to do to keep this information from her. And I always questioned it. I just, it was like, it just would like get at me, like what if I sympathized with my great grandmother in the hospital. And I thought, God, if
Mhm.
something had happened to my sister, I'd want to know.
Yeah.
So when I started, getting really serious about writing, and I wanted to write a novel, that was kind of the story that wouldn't leave me alone, because it was the story I'd been raised on, and I had definite opinions about it. And so I set out to explore that summer, the summer that she has died, and that they are keeping this information from her sister. Um, I moved the story forward, so it's set in 1934 instead of 1929. But it's set in Atlantic City. It follows 7 people, and most of them are members of the family. A couple of them are family friends, and we're following them as they make this decision, and then have to kind of live with the ramifications of that decision.
Well, readers, Rachel has given us 2 amazing books, Florence Adler Swims Forever and The House is on Fire. Now, I know this is the dreaded question, especially when I have an author on the show and they're telling me about their new book, and then I go probing saying, hey, are you working on anything else? So, Rachel, I'm essentially asking you.
Yes, I am working on something else. And that's pretty much all I can say, because it's so new and so, mysterious even to me. But yes, I'm working on something else, and my children are all back in school, so hopefully it'll move a little faster than this past project.
Absolutely. All right, so I really want to dive into your reading life a bit. What was the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend?
The last book I finished reading was Kissy Lehman's Long Division. And have you read that book?
Yes,
It's so smart.
absolutely.
As a, I'm actually teaching it in a class, because he just came to speak at the University of Richmond, where I'm teaching a novel writing workshop,
Oh,
and
amazing.
he was incredible. I mean, but the book, how sometimes you just read something and you're like, how did they do that? Or what, like I want to do that too. How do I do that? Um, the way that he managed to fold time um, in that novel, I think, is really impressive. And it's I'm actually deconstructing it tonight with my students, and I'm just kind of blown away by it. So that's a recent book that I've really enjoyed. And another book that I read recently, that I loved for selfish reasons, and well, lots of different reasons, is Blair Hurley's book Minor Prophets.
Mhm.
Um, she's a friend of mine, and her book is just beautiful. It's like set in kind of the deep dark woods of Minnesota, and it's following this kind of religious sect, and it pulls in all of these kind of political elements that um, I don't know, we all could probably stand to read more about, and just I don't know, it was an eye-opening book for me. So that was another one that I really recently loved.
Amazing. So I'm really curious. I know you're busy as well. And just as readers, this is a conversation we have in the community all the time. And it's on the topic of reading and rereading those books that we read. So my question to you is, do you reread books? And if yes, what was your last reread? And if no, that's okay too.
I have to say it was funny. I was thinking about this question, and I'm not a huge rereader um intentionally. Like sometimes my memory is bad and sometimes I accidentally reread a book. That has happened to me before. And as a result, I actually keep a little notebook where I write down everything I read, because otherwise, like, I will get halfway through a book and be like, this seems so familiar. But as far as kind of intentionally going out to reread things, I don't do it a lot. I do it sometimes when I'm teaching, and I know that there's a reason I'm kind of going back to a book. But I did, for this project, The House is on Fire, I went back and I reread many of my old Jane Austens,
Mhm.
because Jane Austen's books appeared at almost the exact same time as The Fire. And so, no, of course, they were set in England, and, I'm setting this book in the United States, but the difference between England and the United States in 1811 was not quite as significant as it maybe is now. Um, so it really helped me kind of, I felt like tonally, to get into that era
Mhm.
by rereading her language.
Right, right. Okay, that makes sense. Looking back though, what would you say was your favorite childhood book?
Oh, picking one is very difficult. But I will say I was a huge L.M. Montgomery fan. So, I read the Anne of Green Gables books, all seven of them or whatever.
Mhm.
But then I also would read like the spin-offs, the like her daughter, the whatever, Rilla of Ingleside, and whatever came next. Like I read Emily's Quest, all of them. I really loved Ella Montgomery. Um, I read Little Women, I read Laura Ingalls Wilder. I
Mhm.
was a product of the 80s, and so I read what was offered to me in that time period. I mean, a book that probably emotionally really moved me at that age, because I was Jewish growing up, then was, my mother gave me, Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's diary. And I think that probably had a huge impact on me, both in terms of learning about the atrocities that had been committed during World War II, but also she was a writer.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Rachel. So, what books are on your bedside table right now, or just books that you're looking forward to reading in the year ahead?
Well, I will tell you that when I figured out that my publication date for The House is on Fire was the same day as Curtis Sittenfeld's romantic comedy, it made me very sad, because I am a humongous Curtis Sittenfeld fan. And usually when a book of hers comes out, I like to kind of draw the blinds and just sit quietly for 24 hours and consume the book in its entirety and then go on with my life. And so the fact that I will be in the middle of launching my own book means that I will have to read hers much more slowly, than I would ordinarily. So that's one that I'm definitely looking forward to, and will be in my bag as I'm, flying various places for the book tour.
Yay, amazing. All right, Rachel. So, as readers, sometimes, we have some of those reader problems, some more pleasant than others. So, this is a two-part question. One, do you have any advice for someone listening who might be in a reading slump? Any tips or advice that you could give them? But also just someone who might be listening who wants to incorporate more reading into their lives. They're not currently reading as much and they kind of want to get back into things. What advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, I have a couple ideas. I mean, one is, I do think I think it's nice to carry a book anywhere you go. Of course. I'm a reader and a writer, so I love books with me at all times. But there are those times when we're at the doctor's office or waiting for our kid or whatever. And I do like a Kindle for that reason. I still buy a ton of real paper books, but having that Kindle, I think, makes it easier sometimes to get into a book. You can also make the font really big. So it's just like a more pleasant experience. I find I read faster on them. So I think like if I'm in a slump or I'm trying to get back into, reading, that is definitely one way to do it, is to make your life as easy as possible and just carry it. They're so small, they fit in a purse. You can just have a book where you need a book. So I do like having one of those. Um, and then I always, if I'm having a little bit of a reading slump, there's something about finding like a book that's funny and using that as like a way back in. I think reading humor can be a nice appetite cleanser. It's just like uh, palate cleanser, I should say. It's a nice palate cleanser, and yeah, that can get you back in there.
I absolutely love that. And I'm a newbie to the Kindle universe, and I love having my Kindle now.
Yeah, like my husband doesn't like it. Like he goes to bed early, and like if I have my lamp on at night, it bugs him. And so I have
Yeah,
my little reading light that I use sometimes if I've got a paper book. But then, if you have the Kindle, it's easy. So
absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Like I said, I'm new. My husband goes to bed early too, and I'd have to I don't know how to say it, but I'd have to adjust the light so it's not shining in his direction, if that makes sense. So-
they are very finicky, these husbands, sometimes.
Right?
I've
I'm like,
found.
what is this light? Just a little bit of light will, bother him. And obviously, when he's off, so now I'm sitting there with my paper book because I don't know, I
You
love.
have 4 lamps on, it's fine.
Yes, I was just like, ugh. I can't keep the lamp on. I have to have this book light. Then I have to, adjust it so it's not shining in your direction. Instead, it's shining to the wall and the window, which is my side. And I'm just like, all right, whatever. But
Yeah.
I agree. Kindles are helpful. And even though I do carry around a physical book, I find myself also carrying around the Kindle just in case I'm not in the mood to finish what I'm currently reading, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you always have a little library, just waiting for you. And
Yeah,
I get those BookBub emails, and there's always some like great book for $1.99 that you can kind of buy on a whim and just store on your Kindle for those times when you don't know what you're doing.
absolutely. Love it. Love it. Amazing recommendations. Yay. Okay, Rachel, we also love our bookstores. So I want you to share with our listeners some of your favorite bookstores. Could be local to you or something you discovered on your travels, or maybe you'll be stopping in for your book tours. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, in Richmond, we're blessed with many great bookstores. There's one called Book People. There's one called Fountain Bookstore, and then there's another called Chop Suey Books. So we have a lot to choose from, and they're all really wonderful and super supportive of their local authors. So I would advise anyone in Richmond to check them out. I'm excited. I mean, I'm hitting a lot of local bookstores um, for the tour. I think I'm particularly excited to check out Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C.
Yay, amazing. All right, Rachel, kind of bringing things back to The House is on Fire. Again, I know you've done your job, you did all the research, you wrote the book, you've given it to us readers. It's now out there in the world. You're going on tour, so I'm sure you'll be hearing from readers as well. But for our listeners here on the show, I mean, what are you hoping maybe that readers might think or feel, or maybe some reactions you're hoping for after they've turned the last page on The House is on Fire?
I mean, I hope they get to the last page and are just kind of in many ways emotionally wrung out, right? Like that's just the best feeling when you get to the end of a book and you've had all the feelings. Like I I want I want readers to get to the end and say, "Man, this was worth my time. I felt things I haven't felt in a long time." So I think that's always a good goal as a writer. I hope there are sentences that they loved so much they underlined them or, starred them, or just like really beautiful sentences. And, I hope they think about the characters long after they close the book. That's, always when I get that compliment from readers, that means a lot, that the characters stayed with people. Um, I think in this particular case with The House is on Fire, there's some really close correlations to um, what was happening in 1811 and what is still happening today. And we're not as distantly removed from some of these problems as we'd like to think we are. So I also hope that there's some opportunity for thought about that.
Amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.